We take our time on releases of major new models, and I don't think I think it will be great when we do it, and I think we'll be thoughtful about how we do it. Like we may release it in a different way than we've released previous models. Also, I don't even know if we'll call it GPT-5. What I will say is, a lot of people have noticed how much better GPT-4 has gotten since we've released it, and particularly over the last few months. I think that's like a better hint of what the world looks like, where it's not the like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but you use an AI system and the whole system just gets better and better fairly continuously. I think that's like both a better technological direction. I think that's like easier for society to adapt to. But I assume that's where we'll head.
Does that mean that there's not going to be long training cycles and it's continuously retraining or training submodels, Sam? And maybe you could just speak to us about what might change architecturally going forward with respect to large models.
Well, I mean, one thing that you could imagine is this: just that you keep training a model. That would seem like a reasonable thing to me.
Do you think when you talk about releasing it differently this time, are you thinking maybe releasing it to the paid users first, or a slower rollout to get the red teams tight, since now there's so much at stake? You have so many customers actually paying, and you've got everybody watching everything you do. Is it you have to be more thoughtful now, yeah?
Still only available to the paid users, but one of the things that we really want to do is figure out how to make more advanced technology available to free users too. I think that's a super important part of our mission. And this idea that we build AI tools and make them super widely available, free or not that expensive, whatever it is, so that people can use them to go kind of invent the future, rather than the magic AGI in the sky inventing the future and showering it down upon us. That seems like a much better path. It seems like a more inspiring path. I also think it's where things are actually heading. So it makes me sad that we have not figured out how to make GPT-4 level technology available to free users. It's something we really want to do.
It's just very expensive, I take it.
It's very expensive.
Yeah. Chamath, your thoughts?
I think maybe the two big vectors, Sam, that people always talk about is that underlying cost and sort of the latency that's kind of rate limited a killer app. And then I think the second is sort of the long-term ability for people to build in an open source world versus a closed source world. And I think the crazy thing about this space is that the open source community is rabid. So one example that I think is incredible is, we had these guys do a pretty crazy demo for Devin, remember, even 5 or 6 weeks ago, that looked incredible. And then some kid just published it under an open MIT license, like Open Devin, and it's incredibly good and almost as good as that other thing that was closed source. So maybe we can just start with that, which is, tell me about the business decision to keep these models closed source, and where do you see things going in the next couple of years?
So on the first part of your question, speed and cost, those are hugely important to us. And I don't want to give a timeline on when we can bring them down a lot, because research is hard, but I am confident we'll be able to. We want to cut the latency super dramatically. We want to cut the cost really, really dramatically. And I believe that will happen. We're still so early in the development of the science and understanding how this works. Plus, we have all the engineering tailwinds. So I don't know when we get to intelligence too cheap to meter and so fast that it feels instantaneous to us and everything else, but I do believe we can get there for, a pretty high level of intelligence. And it's important to us. It's clearly important to users, and it'll unlock a lot of stuff. On the sort of open source, closed source thing, I think there's great roles for both. I think, we've open sourced some stuff. We'll open source more stuff in the future. But really, our mission is to build towards AGI and to figure out how to broadly distribute its benefits. We have a strategy for that. It seems to be resonating with a lot of people. It obviously isn't for everyone, and there's a big ecosystem, and there'll also be open source models and people who build that way. One area that I'm particularly interested personally in open source for is I want an open source model that is as good as it can be that runs on my phone. And that, I think, is going to, the world doesn't quite have the technology for a good version of that yet. But that seems like a really important thing to go do at some point.
Will you do that? Will you release one?
I don't know if we will or someone will, but someone will.
What about Llama 3?
Llama 3 running on a phone?
Well, I guess maybe there's like a 7 billion version.
Yeah.
I don't know if that will fit on a phone or not, but
that should be fittable on a phone. But I'm not sure if that one is like. I haven't played with it. I don't know if it's good enough to kind of do the thing I'm thinking about here.
So when Llama 3 got released, I think the big takeaway for a lot of people was, oh wow, they've like caught up to GPT-4. I don't think it's equal in all dimensions, but it's like pretty close or pretty in the ballpark. I guess the question is, you guys released 4 a while ago. You're working on 5 or, more upgrades to 4. I mean, I think to Chamath's point about Devin, how do you stay ahead of open source? I mean, that's just like a very hard thing to do in general, right? I mean, how do you think about that?
What we're trying to do is not make the sort of smartest set of weights that we can. But what we're trying to make is like this useful intelligence layer for people to use. And a model is part of that. I think we will stay pretty far ahead of, I hope we'll stay pretty far ahead of the rest of the world on that. But there's a lot of other work around the whole system that's not just that, the model weights. And we'll have to build up enduring value the old-fashioned way like any other business does. We'll have to figure out a great product and reasons to stick with it and, deliver it at a great price.
When you founded the organization, the stated goal or part of what you discussed was, hey, this is too important for any one company to own it. So therefore it needs to be open. Then there was the switch, hey, it's too dangerous for anybody to be able to see it. And we need to lock this down because you had some fear about that, I think. Is that accurate? Because the cynical side is like, well, this is a capitalistic move. And then I'm curious what the decision was here in terms of going from open. The world needs to see this. It's really important to close. Only we can see it.
Well,
how did you come to that conclusion? What were the discussions?
Part of the reason that we released ChatGPT was we want the world to see this. And we've been trying to tell people that AI is really important. And if you go back to October of 2022, not that many people thought AI was going to be that important or that it was really happening. And a huge part of what we try to do is put the technology in the hands of people. Now, again, there's different ways to do that. And I think there really is an important role to just say, here's the weights, have at it. But the fact that we have so many people using a free version of ChatGPT that we don't run ads on, we don't try to make money on, we just put out there because we want people to have these tools, I think has done a lot to provide a lot of value and teach people how to fish, but also to get the world really thoughtful about what's happening here. Now, we still don't have all the answers, and we're fumbling our way through this like everybody else, and I assume we'll change strategy many more times as we learn new things. When we started OpenAI, we had really no idea about how things were going to go, that we'd make a language model, that we'd ever make a product. We started off I remember very clearly that first day where we're like, well, now we're all here. That was, it's difficult to get this set up, but what happens now? Maybe we should write some papers. Maybe we should stand around a whiteboard. And we've just been trying to put one foot in front of the other and figure out what's next and what's next and what's next. And I think we'll keep doing that.
Can I just replay something and just make sure I heard it right? I think what you were saying on the open source, closed source thing is, if I heard it right, all these models, independent of the business decision you make, are going to become asymptotically accurate towards some amount of accuracy. Not all, but let's just say there's 4 or 5 that are well capitalized enough. You guys, Meta, Google, Microsoft, whomever, right? So let's just say 4 or 5, maybe 1 startup. And on the open web. And then quickly, the accuracy or the value of these models will probably shift to these proprietary sources of training data that you could get that others can't, or others can get that you can't. Is that how you see this thing evolving, where the open web gets everybody to a certain threshold and then it's just an arms race for data beyond that?
So I definitely don't think it'll be an arms race for data, because when the models get smart enough at some point, it shouldn't be about more data, at least not for training. It may matter data to make it useful. Look, the one thing that I have learned most throughout all of this is that it's hard to make confident statements a couple of years in the future about where this is all going to go. And so I don't want to try now. I will say that I expect lots of very capable models in the world. And, like, it feels to me like we just like stumbled on a new fact of nature or science or whatever you want to call it, which is like you can like, I don't believe this literally, but it's like a spiritual point. Intelligence is just this emergent property of matter, and that's like a rule of physics or something. So people are going to figure that out, but there will be all these different ways to design the systems. People will make different choices, figure out new ideas, and I'm sure, like any other industry, I would expect there to be multiple approaches and different people like different ones. Some people like iPhone, some people like an Android phone. I think there will be some effect like that.
Let's go back to that first section of just the cost and the speed. All of you guys are sort of a little bit rate limited on literally NVIDIA's throughput, right? And I think that you and most everybody else have sort of effectively announced how much capacity you can get just because it's as much as they can spin out. What needs to happen at the substrate so that you can actually compute cheaper, compute faster, get access to more energy? How are you helping to frame out the industry solving those problems?
Well, we'll make huge algorithmic gains for sure, and I don't want to discount that. I'm very interested in chips and energy, but if we can make a same quality model twice as efficient, that's like we had twice as much compute.
Right.
And I think there's a gigantic amount of work to be done there, and I hope we'll start really seeing those results. Other than that, the whole supply chain is like very complicated. There's logic fab capacity. There's how much HBM the world can make. There's how quickly you can like get permits and pour the concrete, make the data centers, and then have people in there wiring them all up. There's finding the energy, which is a huge bottleneck. But I think when there's this much value to people, the world will do its thing. We'll try to help it happen faster. And there's probably like, I don't know how to give it a number, but there's like some percentage chance where there is, as you were saying, like a huge substrate breakthrough, and we have like a massively more efficient way to do computing. But I don't like bank on that or spend too much time thinking about it.
What about the device side? And sort of, you mentioned sort of the models that can fit on a phone. So obviously, whether that's an LLM or some SLM or something, I'm sure you're thinking about that. But then does the device itself change? I mean, does it need to be as expensive as an iPhone?
I'm super interested in this. I love like great new form factors of computing. And it feels like with every major technological advance, a new thing becomes possible. Phones are unbelievably good. So I think the threshold is like very high here. Like what, like I think I personally think an iPhone is like the greatest piece of technology humanity has ever made. It's really a wonderful product.
What comes after it? Like,
I don't know. I mean, that was what I was saying. It's so good that to get beyond it, I think the bar is like quite high.
Well, you've been working with Johnny Ive on something, right?
We've been discussing ideas, but I don't like if I knew.
Is it that it has to be more complicated or actually just much, much cheaper and simpler?
Well, almost everyone's willing to pay for a phone anyway. So if you could like make a way cheaper device, I think the barrier to carry a second thing or use a second thing is pretty high. So I don't think, given that we're all willing to pay for phones, or most of us are, I don't think cheaper is the answer.
Different is the answer then?
Would there be like a specialized chip that would run on the phone that was really good at powering a phone size AI model?
Probably, but the phone manufacturers are going to do that for sure. That doesn't necessitate a new device. I think you'd have to like find some really different interaction paradigm that the technology enables. And if I knew what it was, I would be excited to be working on it right now. But
you have voice working right now in the app. In fact, I set my action button on my phone to go directly to ChatGPT's voice app, and I use it with my kids, and they love it. Talking to it. It's got latency issues, but it's really
we'll
great.
We'll get that better. And I think voice is a hint to whatever the next thing is. Like if you can get voice interaction to be really good, it feels I think that feels like a different way to use a computer. But again,
what's the
like
blocker with that, by the way? Like, why is it not responsive? And it feels like a CB, like over.
Yeah.
It's really annoying to use, in that way. But it's also brilliant when it gives you the right answer.
We are working on that. It's so clunky right now. It's slow. It's like kind of doesn't feel very smooth or authentic or organic. Like we'll get all that to be much better.
What about computer vision? I mean, they have glasses, or maybe you could wear a pendant. I mean, you take the combination of visual or video data, combine it with voice, and now the AI knows everything that's happening around you.
Super powerful to be able to like the multimodality of saying like, hey, ChatGPT, what am I looking at? Or like, what kind of plant is this? I can't quite tell. That's obvious. That's another, I think, like hint, but whether people want to wear glasses or like hold up something when they want that, like there's a bunch of just like the sort of like societal interpersonal issues here are all very complicated about wearing a computer on your face.
We saw that with Google Glass. People got punched in the face in the mission. Started a lot of fights.
I forgot about that. So I think it's like,
what are the apps that could be unlocked if AI was sort of ubiquitous on people's phones? Do you have a sense of that, or what would you want to see built?
I think what I want is just this always on, like super low friction thing where I can either by voice or by text or ideally like some other, it just kind of knows what I want, have this like constant thing helping me throughout my day that's got like as much context on as possible. It's like the world's greatest assistant. And it's just this like thing working to make me better and better. There's like I know when you hear people like talk about the AI future, they imagine there's sort of two different approaches, and they don't sound that different, but I think they're like very different for how we'll design the system in practice. There's I want an extension of myself. I want like a ghost or an alter ego or this thing that really like is me, is acting on my behalf, is responding to emails, not even telling me about it, is sort of like, it becomes more me and is me. And then there's this other thing, which is like, I want a great senior employee. It may get to know me very well. I may delegate it. You can like have access to my email and I'll tell you the constraints, but I think of it as this like separate entity. And I personally like the separate entity approach better and think that's where we're going to head. And so in that sense, the thing is not you, but it's like a always available, always great, super capable assistant, executive.
It's an agent in a way, like it's out there working on your behalf and understands what you want and anticipates what you want, is what I'm reading into what you're saying.
I think there'd be agent-like behavior, but there's like a difference between a senior employee and an agent.
Yeah.
And like I want it, if I think of like like one of the things that I like about a senior employee is they'll push back on me. They will sometimes not do something I ask, or there sometimes will say like, I can do that thing if you want, but if I do it, here's what I think would happen, and then this and then that, and are you really sure? And I definitely want that kind of vibe, which not just like this thing that I give a task and it blindly does.
It can reason. Yeah.
Yeah, and push back.
It can reason. It has like the kind of relationship with me that I would expect out of a really competent person that I worked with, which is different from like a sycophant.
Yeah.
The thing in that world where if you have this like Jarvis-like thing that can reason, what do you think it does to products that you use today where the interface is very valuable? So for example, if you look at an Instacart, or if you look at an Uber, or if you look at a DoorDash, these are not services that are meant to be pipes that are just providing a set of APIs to a smart set of agents that ubiquitously work on behalf of 8 billion people. What do you think has to change in how we think about how apps need to work, of how this entire infrastructure of experiences need to work in a world where you're agentically interfacing to the world?
I'm actually very interested in designing a world that is equally usable by humans and by AIs. So I like the interpretability of that. I like the smoothness of the handoffs. I like the ability that we can provide feedback or whatever. So, DoorDash could just expose some API to my future AI assistant, and they could go put the order in or whatever. Or I could say, I could be holding my phone and I could say, okay, AI assistant, you put in this order on DoorDash, please. And I could watch the app open and see the thing clicking around, and I could say, hey, no, not this, or there's something about designing a world that is usable equally well by humans and AIs that I think is an interesting concept.
And
same reason I'm more
handoffs.
excited about humanoid robots than sort of robots of very other shapes. The world is very much designed for humans, and I think we should absolutely keep it that way. Mm-hmm. And a shared interface is nice.
So you see voice chat, that modality kind of gets rid of apps. You just ask it for sushi. It knows sushi you liked before. It knows what you don't like and does its best shot at doing it.
It's hard for me to imagine that we just go to a world totally where you say hey, ChatGPT, order me sushi. And it says, okay, do you want it from this restaurant? What kind, what time, whatever. I think visual user interfaces are super good for a lot of things. And it's hard for me to imagine a world where you never look at a screen and just use voice mode only. But I can't imagine that for a lot of things.
Yeah, Apple tried with Siri. Supposedly you can order an Uber automatically with Siri. I don't think anybody's ever done it because why would you take the risk of not putting
the quality, to your point, the quality is not good, but when the quality is good enough, you'll actually prefer it just because it's just lighter weight. You don't have to take your phone out. You don't have to search for your app and press it. And, it automatically logged you out. Oh, hold on, log back in. Oh, TFA. It's a whole pain in the ass.
It's like setting a timer with Siri. I do every time because it works really well and it's great. And I don't need more information.
Exactly.
But ordering an Uber, I want to see the prices for a few different options. I want to see how far away it is. I want to see maybe even where they are on the map because I might walk somewhere. I get a lot more information in less time by looking at that order the Uber screen than I would if I had to do that all through the audio channel.
I like your idea of watching it happen. That's kind of cool.
I think there will just be different. There are different interfaces we use for different tasks, and I think that'll keep going.
Of all the developers that are building apps and experiences on OpenAI, are there a few that stand out for you where you're like, okay, this is directionally going in a super interesting area, even if it's like a toy app? But are there things that you guys point to and say, this is really important?
I met with a new company this morning, or barely even a company. It's two people that are going to work on a summer project, trying to actually finally make the AI tutor. And I've always been interested in this space. A lot of people have done great stuff on our platform, but if someone can deliver the way that you actually they used a phrase I love, which is this is going to be a Montessori level reinvention for how people learn things.
Yeah.
But if you can find this new way to let people explore and learn in new ways on their own, I'm personally super excited about that. A lot of the coding related stuff you mentioned, Devin, earlier, I think that's a super cool vision of the future. The thing that healthcare, I believe should be pretty transformed by this. But the thing I'm personally most excited about is the sort of doing faster and better scientific discovery. GPT-4 clearly not there in a big way, although maybe it accelerates things a little bit by making scientists more productive.
But AlphaFold 3, yeah.
That's
But Sam,
that will be a triumph.
Those are not these models are trained and built differently than the language models. Obviously there's a lot that's similar, but there's a lot, there's kind of a ground up architecture to a lot of these models that are being applied to these specific problem sets, these specific applications, like chemistry interaction modeling, for example.
You'll need some of that for sure. But the thing that I think we're missing across the board for many of these things we've been talking about is models that can do reasoning. And once you have reasoning, you can connect it to chemistry simulators or whatever
I guess
else.
That's the important question I wanted to kind of talk about today, was this idea of networks of models, people talk a lot about agents as if there's kind of this linear set of call functions that happen. But one of the things that arises in biology is networks of systems that have cross interactions, that the aggregation of the system, the aggregation of the network produces an output rather than one thing calling another, that thing calling another. Do we see like an emergence in this architecture of either specialized models or network models that work together to address bigger problem sets, use reasoning? There's computational models that do things like chemistry or arithmetic, and there's other models that do, rather than one model to rule them all that's purely generalized.
I don't know. I don't know how much reasoning is going to turn out to be a super generalizable thing. I suspect it will, but that's more just like an intuition and a hope, and it would be nice if it worked out that way. I don't know if that's like...
But let's walk through the protein modeling example. There's a bunch of training data, images of proteins, and then sequence data, and they build a model, predictive model, and they have a set of processes and steps for doing that. Do you envision that there's this artificial general intelligence or this great reasoning model that then figures out how to build that submodel, that figures out how to solve that problem by acquiring the necessary data and then resolving it to a
There's
solution?
so many ways where that could go. Like maybe it trains a literal model for it, or maybe it just like knows the one big model, what it can like go pick what other training data it needs and ask a question and then update on that.
I guess the real question is, are all these startups going to die? Because so many startups are working in that modality, which is go get special data and then train a new model on that special data from the ground up. And then it only does that one sort of thing, and it works really well at that one thing, and it works better than anything else at that one thing.
You know, there's like a version of this I think you can like already see. When you were talking about like biology and these complicated networks of systems, the reason I was smiling is I got super sick recently. And I'm mostly better now, but it was just like body like got beat up like one system at a time, fought, like you can really tell like, okay, it's this cascading thing. And that reminded me of you like talking about the like biology is just these like, you have no idea how much these systems interact with each other until things start going wrong. And that was sort of like interesting to see. But I was using ChatGPT to try to like figure out like what was happening, whatever, and would say, well, I'm, unsure of this one thing. And then I just like posted a paper on it without even reading the paper, like in the context. And it says, oh, that was the thing I was unsure of. Like now I think this instead. So there's like that was like a small version of what you're talking about, where you can say this, I don't know this thing. And you can put more information. You don't retrain the model, you're just adding it to the context here. And now you're getting a...
So these models that are predicting protein structure, like, let's say, right? This is the whole basis. And now other molecules at AlphaFold 3. Is it basically a world where the best generalized model goes in and gets that training data and then figures out on its own? And maybe you could use an example for us. Can you tell us about Sora, your video model that generates amazing moving images, moving video, and what's different about the architecture there, whatever you're willing to share on how that is different?
Yeah. So on the general thing first, you clearly will need specialized simulators, connectors, pieces of data, whatever. But my intuition, and again, I don't have this like backed up with science, my intuition would be if we can figure out the core of generalized reasoning, connecting that to new problem domains in the same way that humans are generalized reasoners, would, I think, be doable.
It's like a faster unlock than...
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Sora like does not start with a language model. That's a model that is like customized to do video, and so like we're clearly not at that world yet.
Right. So just as an example, for you guys to build a good video model, you built it from scratch using, I'm assuming, some different architecture and different data. But in the future, the generalized reasoning system, the AGI, whatever system, theoretically could render that by figuring out how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, one example of this is like, okay, as far as I know, all the best text models in the world are still autoregressive models, and the best image and video models are diffusion models. And that's like sort of strange in some sense.
Yeah.
So there's a big debate about training data. You guys have been, I think, the most thoughtful of any company. You've got licensing deals now, FT, et cetera. And we got to, I guess, be gentle here because you're involved in a New York Times lawsuit. You weren't able to settle, I guess, an arrangement with them for training data. How do you think about fairness in fair use? We've had big debates here on the pod. Obviously, your actions are, speak volumes that you're trying to be fair by doing licensing deals. So what's your personal position on the rights of artists who create beautiful music, lyrics, books, and you taking that and then making a derivative product out of it and then monetizing it? And what's fair here? And how do we get to a world where, artists can make content in the world and then decide what they want other people to do with it? Yeah. And I'm just curious your personal belief, because I know you to be a thoughtful person on this. And I know a lot of other people in our industry are not very thoughtful about how they think about content creators.
So I think it's very different for different kinds of, look, on fair use, I think we have a very reasonable position under the current law, but I think AI is so different that for things like art, we'll need to think about them in different ways. But let's say if you go read a bunch of math on the internet and learn how to do math, that I think seems unobjectionable to most people. And then there's another set of people who might have a different opinion. Well, what if you actually, let me not get into that just in the interest of not making this answer too long. So I think there's one category of people are like, okay, there's generalized human knowledge. You can kind of go, if you learn that, that's open domain or something. If you kind of go learn about the Pythagorean theorem. That's one end of the spectrum. And then I think the other extreme end of the spectrum is art. And maybe even more specifically, I would say it's it's a system generating art in the style or the likeness of another artist, would be kind of the furthest end of that. And then there's many, many cases on the spectrum in between. I think the conversation has been historically very caught up on training data, but it will increasingly become more about what happens at inference time. As training data becomes less valuable and what the system does accessing, information in context in real time or taking like something like that, what happens at inference time will become more debated and how what the new economic model is there. So if you say create me a song in the style of Taylor Swift, even if the model were never trained on any Taylor Swift songs at all, you can still have a problem, which is it may have read about Taylor Swift, it may know about her themes, Taylor Swift means something. And then the question is should that model, even if it were never trained on any Taylor Swift song whatsoever, be allowed to do that? And if so, how should Taylor get paid?
Right.
So I think there's an opt-in, opt-out in that case, first of all, and then there's an economic model. Staying on the music example, there is something interesting to look at from the historical perspective here, which is sampling and how the economics around that work. This is not quite the same thing, but it's an interesting place to start looking.
Sam, let me just challenge that. What's the difference in the example you're giving of the model learning about things like song structure, tempo, melody, harmony relationships, discovering all the underlying structure that makes music successful, and then building new music using training data, and what a human does that listens to lots of music, learns about, and their brain is processing and building all those same sort of predictive models or those same sort of discoveries or understandings. What's the difference here? And why are you making the case that perhaps artists should be uniquely paid. This is not a sampling situation. The AI is not outputting and it's not storing in the model the actual original song.
Yeah,
it's learning structure, right?
So, I wasn't trying to make that point because I agree. Like in the same way that humans are inspired by other humans, I was saying if you say generate me a song in the style of Taylor Swift,
I see. Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's
where the prompt leverages some artist.
I think personally that's a different case.
Would you be comfortable asking, or would you be comfortable letting the model train itself, or a music model being trained on the whole corpus of music that humans have created, without royalties being paid to the artists that that music is being fed in? And then you're not allowed to ask, artist-specific prompts. You could just say, "Hey, play me a really cool pop song that's fairly modern about heartbreak, with a female voice."
Yeah. We have currently made the decision not to do music, and partly because exactly these questions of where you draw the lines and even I was meeting with several musicians that I really admire recently. And I was just trying to talk about some of these edge cases, but even the world in which if we went and let's say we paid 10,000 musicians to create a bunch of music just to make a great training set where the music model could learn everything about song structure and what makes a good, catchy beat and everything else, and only trained on that. Let's say we could still make a great music model, which maybe we could. I was kind of posing that as a thought experiment to musicians, and they're like, well, I can't object to that on any principle basis at that point. And yet there's still something I don't like about it. Now, that's not a reason not to do it necessarily, but it is. Did you see that ad that Apple put out? Maybe it was yesterday or something of squishing all of human creativity down into one really thin iPad.
What was your take on it? People got really emotional about it. Yeah. It's a stronger reaction than you would think. Yeah.
There's something about. I'm obviously hugely positive on AI, but there is something that I think is beautiful about human creativity and human artistic expression. And, for an AI that just does better science, great, bring that on. But an AI that is going to do this deeply beautiful human creative expression, I think we should figure out, it's going to happen. It's going to be a tool that will lead us to greater creative heights. But I think we should figure out how to do it in a way that preserves the spirit of what we all care about here.
And I think your actions speak loudly. We were trying to do Star Wars characters in DALL-E. And if you ask for Darth Vader, it says, hey, we can't do that. So you've, I guess, red teamed or whatever you call it internally.
We try.
You're not allowing people to use other people's IP. So you've taken that decision. Now, if you asked it to make a Jedi Bulldog or a Sith Lord Bulldog, which I did, it made my Bulldogs as Sith Bulldogs. So
there's an interesting question
really about your spectrum, right?
Yeah. We put out this thing yesterday called the spec, where we're trying to say, here's how our model is supposed to behave. And it's very hard. It's a long document. It's very hard to specify exactly in each case where the limits should be. And I view this as a discussion that's going to need a lot more input. But these sorts of questions about, okay, maybe it shouldn't generate Darth Vader, but the idea of a Sith Lord or a Sith style thing or Jedi at this point is part of the culture. These are all hard decisions.
Yeah. And I think you're right. The music industry is going to consider this opportunity to make Taylor Swift songs their opportunity. It's part of the 4-part fair use test is, these who gets to capitalize on new innovations for existing art. And Disney has an argument that, hey, if you're going to make Sora versions of Ashoka or whatever, Obi-Wan Kenobi, that's Disney's opportunity. And that's a great partnership for you, to pursue.
So I think this section I would label as AI and the law. So let me ask maybe a higher level question. What does it mean when people say regulate AI?
Totally.
Sam, what does that even mean?
And comment on California's new proposed regulations as well if you're up for it.
I'm concerned. I mean, there's so many proposed regulations, but most of the ones I've seen on the California state things I'm concerned about. I also have a general fear of the states all doing this themselves. When people say regulate AI, I don't think they mean one thing. I think there's some people are ban the whole thing. Some people are like, don't allow it to be open source, require it to be open source. The thing that I am personally most interested in is I think there will come, look, I may be wrong about this. I will acknowledge that this is a forward-looking statement, and those are always dangerous to make. But I think there will come a time in the not super distant future, like, we're not talking like decades and decades from now, where the frontier AI systems are capable of causing significant global harm. And for those kinds of systems, in the same way we have like global oversight of nuclear weapons or synthetic bio or things that can really like have a very negative impact way beyond the realm of one country, I would like to see some sort of international agency that is looking at the most powerful systems and ensuring like reasonable safety testing. These things are not going to escape and recursively self-improve or whatever.